I have two questions about reincarnation. The first one, we had many lifetimes before this one. This is a quote for something I said. And you say the separate selves just cover it up. But why is it relevant that we had many lifetimes in different bodies? And number two, reincarnation. Where did this idea come from? I know the Bible mentions life after death, and then on the opposite side, people speak on being reincarnated. Is there an easy way to make sense of this? I had a hard knock in a jail cell where essentially I was vaporized out of my body for 2 weeks and got the opportunity to see a lot of different realms, almost like a life review that I was in. So reincarnation is still something I can't really understand. I know there are other realms, but I'm unable to really understand where people talk about before life and after life. I could write for hours on this, but I'm curious if you could explain this in a way that's tangible and usable for growth. Okay, so why is reincarnation important? And where did the idea come from? Well, first of all, many people in the West, especially Christians, will say, oh, it just came from the East, from the Hindu religion, because this is what they've been teaching for thousands of years, and it's all demonic, it's all of the devil, and so forth, because it's not in the Bible. And this is, of course, not the right understanding. It's not a high understanding. It's true that in the East they have been teaching reincarnation for thousands of years. But where did the concept originally come from? It came from experience. It came from direct experience. Because as you raise your level of consciousness, perhaps we should just talk about that for a second. What has been lost in, for example, Christianity, is that there are levels of consciousness. But you just need to look at the world. And you see some of these people who have perpetrated all of these atrocities. I always talk about Hitler, Stalin, and Mao, who killed millions of their own people. Do you really think that Hitler was in the same state of consciousness that you and I are in? Or do you think he was in a lower state of consciousness, and that's why he was so self-centered, so had no empathy for other people, and therefore was willing to kill so many people to defend his idea? Can you really say that criminals are in the same state of consciousness as honest people who are trying to do good and help others? So we have to realize there are different levels of consciousness. And what you can do, and what is the whole idea of a spiritual path, is that you can realize this and you can start a process where you are consciously, deliberately, systematically seeking to raise your consciousness to higher and higher levels. And my only point for this is that as you raise your consciousness, you begin to see things that you couldn't see at a lower level of consciousness. I've given this metaphor before, that you are in a forest, and here's this observation tower. And you start walking up the staircase. And first you see tree trunks, then you see leaves, and then finally you get up above the trees. Now you're seeing the whole landscape. Mountains, there's the ocean in the background, wide open landscape. And that's how it is on the spiritual path. So as you raise your level of consciousness, there comes a point where first the whole idea that you have lived before becomes self-evident to you, because it has explanatory power. It can explain something that no other theory or concept can explain. And there are many levels of this, but let's focus on two. You have an eternal, timeless question that has been asked by people for millennia. Why do bad things happen to good people? So here you have a person, he's lived his whole life being honest, being decent towards other people, not trying to cheat anybody. Maybe he's even been a good Christian who's been going to church every Sunday. And then suddenly he has a car accident and dies. And people say, why? Why did God let this happen? He was such a good person. And the explanation that reincarnation gives you is that yes, this person was a good person in this lifetime, at least from an outer perspective, but he might not have been in previous lifetimes. And the whole idea of reincarnation is, of course, karma. You can, whatever you do is when you take an action, or even the way you talk to other people or treat them, it creates an energetic impulse. And this energetic impulse cycles through the universe. I talk about 4 levels of the universe, and eventually it comes back to you. And sometimes this karmic impulse can come back in the same lifetime where you created it, but other times it doesn't. Because let's say, for example, in a past lifetime, this good person that we are talking about, he was a warrior. And he killed another person. And then immediately afterwards, he was killed. So there wasn't time for the karmic impulse to come back. And therefore, it comes back in a future lifetime. So this is one explanation of why things can happen to seemingly good people. There's a lot more complexity, but I don't want to make it too complicated here. So this explains this eternal question, why do bad things happen to good people? Because they have created a karmic impulse in a past life that now comes back in this lifetime. And many times I honestly believe that when this happens to people who are good, the karmic impulse isn't as severe as it could have been if they had not been good people. Because as you raise your consciousness, you also become a good person. You become less aggressive, you become less selfish, you become more empathetic and sensitive towards other people. And therefore, you're not doing things to them that you see people of a lower state of consciousness do. So this is one thing. But the other thing is that how do you raise your consciousness? When I talk about raising consciousness, you raise your consciousness by realizing, and this is what many even spiritual people haven't quite realized, is that what limits your state of consciousness is your unresolved psychology. So the only way to raise your consciousness is to look at what's going on in your subconscious mind. And consciously and deliberately resolve this psychology. I have many videos talk about we have these subconscious selves that are based on an illusion created often in a traumatic situation. And when we resolve these, we raise our state of consciousness. We can sort of say that your mind is a container, and the more trash you have in the container, the more filled the container is with trash, the lower will be your state of consciousness, because all of this unresolved psychology causes you to be very focused on yourself. Where as you throw some of the trash out of the container of your mind, you're not so focused on yourself anymore. You can be focused on helping other people, or you can be focused on reaching up, contemplating the bigger questions of life. So, what I'm saying, when you grow in consciousness, you do this by looking at your psychology. When you start looking at your psychology, you realize that it is a lot more complex than it should be if it had been created in this lifetime. I had a very easy lifetime in this life. I was not abused by my parents in any way. They were not poor. We had everything we needed. But I have looked deeply into my psychology over the last 48 years, and I have discovered traumas there. There is no way to explain them with what I experienced in this lifetime. These traumas go way, way back. And I actually have a whole series called the Avatar Psychology, where I talk about how many of us came to Earth from a natural planet, were shocked, traumatized by conditions on Earth, and we have been dealing with these traumas ever since. So when you really look into the complexity of your psychology, reincarnation is really the only logical way to explain that it is so complex, that it goes so deep, and you have these traumas that are deeper than anything you've experienced in this lifetime. And so, you know, one of the questions said, is there an easy way to make sense of this? Well, I don't know what I just explained is an easy way, but the person is also in the second question talking about how he actually experienced being outside his physical body. So the person has experienced, I'm not the physical body, I'm more than the physical body. I have what's generally called a soul. I don't really use that word so much because it can be confusing, but anyway, so there's a part of him that was outside the physical body, but he hasn't still experienced that part must have existed before this physical body and will exist after the body dies. Why wouldn't it? But that's what many people who have had near-death experience have experienced. Many people who have, many children remember their recent past life after they're born. Some even remember several lives. There are people who, and I've met people who have had many of their previous lifetimes revealed. There's several books about this. Many Lives, Many Masters is one that talk about people have remembered their past lives and they can trace this back. And there are even well-documented cases that people remember details from a past life that they couldn't possibly have known in this lifetime. And so if you look into this, you will see that it's experiential. People have experienced this. And it's not something they believe in from an intellectual argument. And so when you experience that your mind can exist independently of the physical body, it's not a very big shift to realize that your mind is more timeless than the body. So your mind must have existed before it came into this particular physical body. And it will continue to exist after this particular physical body dies. And why couldn't it have been in other bodies in the past, and why couldn't it potentially be in other bodies in the future, unless you have reached a certain level of consciousness that you don't need to reincarnate? You can break out of the cycle of reincarnation and ascend permanently to the spiritual realm.